meeting.
Now call to order. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate that. The sign-in sheet is circulating at some point. If you have not signed in, please remember to do so. And also, if you've had an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting, you received the minutes and the recording of the meeting. Are there any questions, suggested changes to the minutes? If there are no changes or suggested amendments to the minutes, if we could have a motion to approve the minutes, please.
So moved.
Second. Been moved and properly second. The minutes are adopted. Thank you very much. This time we'll ask or invite members of the public to comment. There's a sign-in sheet if anyone wishes to comment. Seeing no takers, thank you very much. Now we'll entertain the monthly audit report. That report is submitted to the city council for their review, and should they have questions, then we're prepared and to appear to answer those questions. I think you can briefly give us an update.
We started out with an update on the strategic work plan. Mr. Donnell distributed the anonymous complaint form and the employee complaint form by email before the last meeting. And he believes that at that point, all questions have been addressed and the work group did not have any other further recommendations. One of the primary concerns from the audit committee was raised with the current lack of support for anonymous submissions. Another concern involved ensuring that individuals named in complaints received appropriate notifications. If a complaint is submitted by an employee, HR must verify that the employee's working there. It was also noted that through Tyler Munis, there may be existing forms that may be suitable for employee use, and there will be further discussions with HR. It was also emphasized that once a record is created, there's no exemptions under the Open Records Act that guarantee anonymity. While complaints may remain anonymous to some extent, particularly when submitted by employees or members of the public, verification of employment and the ethical nature of the issue is still required. In cases involving employees, HR involvement will ultimately be necessary. Chair Robinson proposed advancing the recommendations outlined in the ethics ordinance by submitting them to legal counsel for drafting, and the draft will be returned to the committee for vote. New business involved Mr. Reed updating the committee on the FY24 audit. The city's previous method of accounting for interfund balances did not fully translate during the Tyler Munis transition. As a result, there were discrepancies that emerged that are currently being addressed and evaluated. Mr. Franklin from JTA attended the meeting as well to discuss the comptroller's letter regarding the negative net position. Mr. Reed did respond in this, notating that the unrestricted net position has improved in the current audit compared to the previous year. He also emphasized that this is not a fundamental concern for the auditors or indicative of poor financial health. The unrestricted net position continues to show positive progress.
All right. Thank you. Any questions or concerns about the report? And again, that report was submitted to council for their review and consideration. If there are no questions, we wanted to we invited Teresa Lynn, our attorney, to address some of the concerns that the subcommittee had raised regarding the ordinance. So she is here today to present those findings and then answer any questions that we might have.
Matt Johnny,
Each one of these,
Ron called me about the requested ordinance, and there were, I think, 3 changes that you guys requested. One of them was easy, and it was add the grandchildren to the ordinance. And let me tell you why it wasn't in there. Our ordinance directly mimics the state law, and the state law didn't have grandchildren in it. I'm assuming that probably at the time it was written that there were not a lot of people who lived long enough to have grandchildren who were old enough to be adults, you know, so maybe you guys should suggest to the state legislature that they add that term too. So we've got an ordinance, I drafted an ordinance with that particular change in it to add that term in there. So not only if you have a grandparent with an interest, but you have a grandchild with an interest, that's for those efforts for this. Now, the other two things that you requested, I suggested to Ron, I said, let me come and discuss those with you because the ethics committee has already been down that road. And they have developed some policies, and I think you just got a copy of those. So some of the things you suggested have already been addressed in the ethics committee's policies and procedures, right? So when they meet, they go by these policies and procedures. So number one, I wanted you to see those to see if the policies and procedures took care of any of the issues that you had. Okay? And I'll give you a chance to look at those just for a second, but let me throw out one more thing before I do, and that is your request for the anonymity of the person who is making the report. Yeah, I believe Marta was there, and for all those, and I think Tawanica was there as well. The ethics committee went through at great length the anonymity issue and their policies. They felt like that the main time that somebody would need to be anonymous in reporting was if a sexual harassment type of issue is reported. Now, I want you to think back to the ethics ordinance, okay? What is handled by an ethics ordinance? And that is if if you're on the council or you're an employee, you've got to disclose if you've got a personal interest in something that you're either voting on or that you're working on, okay? That's the first thing. And then you can't accept gratuities for something that's a regular part of your job. You can't use information that you get through the city for your own personal gain, and you can't use municipal time or facilities for your own personal gain. Okay, that's basically the only thing that the ethics committee and the ethics policy deals with. It doesn't deal with run of the mill, and I don't want to discount any run of the mill, but anything else it doesn't deal with. For example, if an employee has a complaint against a boss, right, or if an employee has a complaint against a council person, and it doesn't hit one of those things that's in the ethics ordinance, which, by the way, comes directly from the state law, then it doesn't implicate the ethics committee. It's not really an ethics complaint. It's another type of complaint that needs to be dealt with, but it's not an ethics complaint. So one more thing I want to throw out, and that is on this anonymity issue. The problem that the ethics committee was having with the anonymity was that they were getting reports, okay, and there was not enough there for them to deal with. They needed more information. They needed to go back to the reporter and ask questions, and they could not do so. Those were happening, as I understand it, frequently. So thereby, they were stuck. They couldn't do anything with it. There was not enough information, and the report went unhandled by the ethics. Before there was an ethics committee, it was unhandled by the city personnel that was supposed to handle it. So just wanted to throw that out there. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You're welcome as a committee to make any recommendation to the ethics committee that you want to make. You're welcome to make any suggestion to the city council that you want to make as to whether the ordinance on ethics needs to be changed. It pretty much adopts the state law, except for the fact that we have an ethics committee here in the city, and some cities don't have that. So I'm gonna give you a second to look at that.
And while they're looking at it, one of the things that we suggested, because we realize that there is that barrier. If someone reports anonymously, they can't get the kind of information that they need. What we looked at was a second step to that, or a dual system, where if they look at the complaint, deem that complaint valid, and they need to obtain additional information in order to, address it, then there's a mechanism in place for them to, move further to get that, document of the claim, that it is a valid claim. And so, you know, that's one of the main concerns that we had, that it should not stop, because it could be, you know, something that's valid that needs to be rectified. Because it's disruptive to the business process. So that was one of the
Okay.
pieces we were looking.
So then the question becomes, and y'all are welcome to make any kind of, the question becomes, do you want to make a recommendation to the ethics committee to change their policies and procedures? Or do you want to make a recommendation to the council to change the ordinance? Okay, once you look at the policy, it could very well be that the policies of the ethics committee would, you know, changing that would help, but they're not necessarily at your, you know, they're not required to do what you are asking them to do.
Which of those two avenues would you recommend?
You guys are wanting, if I understand it correctly, you're wanting a first step to where someone reports and somebody, maybe Ms. McKinney in the internal audit or somebody would get the complaint, the ethics complaint, and they would determine if there's enough information there, and then they would submit it to the ethics committee on an anonymous basis. Is that what you guys are saying?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I've been at each one of the ethics committee meetings, and they had the same concern that you guys had. So I mean, I think that they would accept your recommendation and meet and change their policy.
Okay.
I mean, I don't see why they would not do that, but I can't.
I got you.
And into that, kind of what we talked about recently, I guess we'd have to get the ethics committee updated, right? Because currently, we got several members that are not serving their terms that ran out or they left. So if we went that route, I think it would almost need to make sure that the ethics committee is back up and kind of running.
Yeah, we were, our office was concerned that there hadn't been any ethics complaints in a long
So,
time.
yeah.
So earlier this summer, we did a test run from our office when we were going to just issue an ethics complaint and just put test on there, you know, just to see if they were going through. And so we went on the website, the city's website, and on the city's website, it says, if you want to issue an ethics complaint, then click on this, and it took you to a secondary provider. We went to we went there, and then that secondary provider said, sorry, but the city of Jackson doesn't have a contract with us to.
I think
So-
we stopped it, didn't we?
Yeah, but but it was still on our website as the means of making an ethics complaint. So that means that there were, you know, years maybe where the process wasn't working. And
Yeah.
so this, I mean, I'm not sure what the hanging was and what happened, but there was whoever we were contracting with, we were no longer contracting with them. And so there wasn't a means for somebody to provide. So were there people that wanted to make ethics complaints? Maybe.
Yeah, well, and that may be the reasoning, 'cause I think we talked about that in the meeting a week or two ago, and Ms. McKinney mentioned that, yeah, there hadn't been one made in a year and a half or longer, so that.
And that's about the
Timing,
process,
okay.
about the time period that was not available. So, but it was changed, I believe, when we reported to you guys took care of it immediately.
So it's available now.
Yeah, I had it updated.
You had it updated, okay.
Yeah.
It's available now.
Yes, the current procedure is now, if you go to the city's website and say, how do I submit an ethics complaint? It is a PDF now that lays out the current process set by the board on how to do so.
So
We've only had one complaint since that actual ethical advocacy program was stopped. We did have one complaint that followed the ordinance since then. We only
They
have
just
one.
brought it in hand delivered,
Mhm.
okay.
Hand delivery, yes.
But, you know, that's a problem, because, you know, if the established procedure was that people, went online to issue those complaints, and then they go there and there's not an avenue to do it,
Yeah.
then, you know, that's a little bit of a problem. I'm glad it's solved now. So just for future reference, which department would be responsible for making sure that contract is continued, or if we decide to change vendors, that a new contract is put in place?
So Blanca can probably speak more to this than I can, but the vendor was selected in order to handle anonymous complaints. And once the ordinance was changed to not allow that, there is really no need for a software vendor, because now they're submitted in person. The current ones.
So we've taken that link down? on the website?
Correct.
Yes.
That's why if you go to the city of Jackson's website under how do I, it's at the very top. One of the options is submit an ethical complaint, and when you click on that, there's a PDF that lays out the process on what you have to do and how to submit it to Ms. McKinney.
So if we wanted to instate, put that method back into place, is that our intent? That we want it to be anonymous, is that our intent? Or we just stated earlier?
I think that's what we're working through and
Yes.
trying to figure out. I don't know if it's-
have a voice in this, but Teresa will be able to answer this question. Can we pay somebody to abrogate our responsibilities under the Public Records Act?
What now?
Hmm.
Good question. I know that corporations, you know, a lot of businesses we represent certainly have that third party
Right.
vendor to handle that complaint. I can find out for you.
Would they still be liable even if they did? Would the corporation still be liable? I hire somebody to do it, but I
Because if they
can't
have the
do
information,
away
but
with
they,
my responsibilities.
can we contract that away?
That, they just take in the complaint,
Okay.
right? They just take in the complaint and then they forward that complaint to somebody in the HR department at that particular business. So they're just the complaints.
Delegate the task and delegate the responsibility. You know, it always comes back.
My gut feeling tells me that we would be able to do that they could, that's the same process that we had before. You know, we
Yeah,
had-
that makes
they
sense.
would report. But
Let me ask you this about the current system, where they fill out that PDF. Is there ability to be anonymous with that, filling out that PDF?
No, because under the ordinance, it says you have to have name, it has to be notarized and submitted and everything along those lines.
So if you guys want the anonymous feature in there, you're going to have to make a recommendation to the city council to change the ordinance. Because right now, it does not allow an anonymous, and it makes you also have to have it notarized to make sure that the person, there were some concerns that people were signing complaints with someone else's name and turning them in.
So that's where the notary came in.
Yeah, that's where the notary came in.
Well, and the other concern is that, you know, we somehow manage, the politically motivated complaints. You know, and I'm sure they're very prevalent around election time, that people just complain because, you know, that's not their candidate. So, you know, we wanted to consider all of those things and make sure we have a process in place that's, you know, in essence, fair and accurate. And allows people to, you know, file a valid complaint. And we know that every complaint is not a breach of ethics. So that's the initial thing. Even on the, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the ordinance already addresses the election cycle. It says during years in which the city holds municipal elections, the internal auditor shall not accept any complaints concerning or directed at a person running in such an election during the period from the last day on which the person may qualify as a candidate until after 11:59 PM on the day following the election day. So there's a moratorium right before the election.
Which is excellent. So, and I think just based on everything that I'm hearing, I wanted to hear the discussion from everybody else. I think it would be, in best interest, I think, to allow those anonymous complaints. And then make sure that we have a mechanism in place that if you need additional information before it goes to the committee, that there's still a process that maintains confidentiality so that they can gather the pertinent information that's needed, you know, to address that complaint. And then the other piece, and that may already be in place, is once a complaint is resolved, we should have a record somewhere that complaint has been resolved. Because if somebody comes back a year later, whatever, what happened to my complaint, then we have, you know, documentation that was, you know, was actually resolved.
One of the things, Marta and Tawanka will remember this from the ethics committee when they were debating, it was a long debate on, you know, this issue, but one of the things that came up was, if some very touchy issue, you know, let's say we've got council person, you know, Mary Smith, okay, And the complaint was that Mary Smith was sleeping with, I'm gonna make it really wild and crazy here, but she was sleeping with somebody, to get votes or whatever on issues, okay? That prompted, and it was anonymous, so that prompted an ethics complaint, and then it prompted the internal auditor to turn it over to the ethics committee. They were tasked then to investigate, okay? So, and they had to investigate that whole situation in depth, because it's a serious allegation, right? And if there were no truth to it, and if it was meant to harm somebody, and, did it for that particular purpose, then this is all public, it's all public knowledge, that's the type of situation they were seeing, not necessarily that complaint, I made that one kind of wild, but they were seeing that kind of situation, and it prompted a big public investigation. So, the anonymity is, and again, I don't have a feeling about it one way or another. That's completely up to you guys and them, but I'm just trying to tell you some of the things that it does allow, and that's what prompted the swing in the other direction, so.
I think as we're trying to figure out the anonymity part is, it started out and anybody could throw anything in, right?
Right.
And we've realized kind of the trial and error, that's not the best. And then we've kind of gone the other way where you've got to sign and get it notarized. And in some ways that helps prevent people from throwing crazy stuff out there. I think my concern, and it was kind of answered today, was, well, did we swing too far if we've not had any complaints in the last 2 years or a year and a half? Not that you want a bunch of complaints, obviously, but you would think if we've got crickets for a year and a half, did we do something that is keeping legitimate complaints from coming in? So I think that's part, at least for me, what had me think, okay, do we need to change some of that? Now knowing what we know today about the kind of website issue, that seems like that played a large part in it. And I hope, it sounds like we've got that figured out. But I think to that point, I think just for me, I would need a little bit more time to think through the anonymity question before I feel confident of like suggesting to the council or the ethics committee. And not to continue to delay it, but I think it's an important thing we're working through. Tying all that together, though, I think one of the biggest parts of that is the ethics committee and us as we're working to ensure that gets put back into place. Because unless I'm wrong, it seems like we've got a few members that are still on the ethics committee, but it's not like if there was a legitimate complaint that came in today, I don't know if there would be enough members to deal with an ethics complaint. So it's almost kind of like before we can, I guess there's two things. We're working through that thought process. Is it anonymous? Is it not? While at the same time, I think we need to really make sure we get the ethics committee up to speed and in place as soon as possible.
I agree. I think that we definitely need to get the ethics committee set in stone again and get them meeting and even, get their ideas. But the question I was thinking about is, could you kind of meet in the middle? I mean, have it anonymous with the exception of the ethics committee? Is that something, they know the players involved, but until you get kind of to the end of it, that it, anonymous to everyone else.
Public meeting.
It's public.
Public
So
meeting.
there's no way to do that.
The only way I can think of is if that's your concern is, to have the person that it comes into, if it comes into the internal auditor's office, which it does, right? Yeah, then there's no anonymity with that office, but then there is anonymity with and I'm trying to think through this with the committee.
Yeah.
But the internal auditor is not charged with investigating. The committee is charged with investigating. I guess they could send the questions back to the internal auditor and she could then ask those questions if they had them, but
I didn't think it went any further. I thought it went to her and then she looked at it and stated, is this legitimate? And then asked the questions. She did, that's how it was handled. You asked the questions and then it went to the ethics committee.
Right.
If there was grounds.
Who has the information? Is it a public record?
Yeah, and let's go back to my Mary Smith. It's a terrible example, but I think it works. Okay, let's go back to that example. If it comes into, the internal auditor's office, okay, she would actually have to investigate it to figure out if there's any, legs to the complaint, which puts the task on her instead of the committee,
Yeah.
so.
And that's one concern. This is not speaking to who the person is in the role, but the internal audit role, that's a lot for that one person to receive that, figure out if it has merit, investigate it, and then kind of a yes or no. I'm not saying it can't work. I just think that would be a concern over, depending on what the situation is.
Yeah.
Or the number of
Or
complaints
the number of
coming
complaints
in.
coming in.
So in the past, what would happen is when I would get that written complaint in, I would verify that, hey, this is a valid person, they have ID, they have a complaint, and, they spelled it out for us. Once I've compiled everything and made sure that it was legitimate, not that the accusation is legitimate, but the package was complete, then that's when I would pass it over to the ethics committee, and they would begin their investigation on whether or not it was an actual violation.
So you did absolutely no investigation.
No
You were just
investigation.
verifying.
Other
what
than
was
making
in
sure
front
that,
of you.
yes, other than making sure it wasn't, just a fake report, making sure that it was solid.
So in that process, when it came into you, you had to have what identifying information
Yes,
for that individual.
it had to be notarized.
Right, and you were charged with maintaining confidentiality to the extent that you could.
Well,
Yes.
it wasn't confidential under our current umbrella. It's not confidential. But I would pass along their information, their identity to the ethics committee, because at that point, there was no confidentiality in place.
And so prior to that, rather than the complaints coming directly to you, individuals went online
Yes,
and lodged the complaints.
yes,
And so they were able to be completely anonymous at that
Yes.
point. Okay.
yes.
I may be getting it mixed up, and please, Mr. Kenny, help me if was there at some point, or did we change this, where the internal auditor had to, and like even language here, ensure that the complaint received and meets all requirements?
Mhm. The requirements such as, identity notarized, and that they spelled out their actual complaint. So I
Okay.
made sure that they checked all of those boxes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then at some point there was language of like, if it has warrant or not. Are we doing that anymore, or was that now passed over? And I may have the language wrong, but initially, wasn't there a part where it was?
In the beginning, when it was very gray, when it initially started out, when they were coming through ethical advocacy, we would determine, because it came to like 4 of us here in the city, we would determine if it had enough substance to be turned over to the ethics committee. Because in the beginning, when they first started coming in, they were very sketchy. I don't know if you remember, but a lot of them were, a lot of them lacked substantial information to actually pass on. In the beginning, it was, a lot of touch and go until we got some actual structure to it.
So what were the 4 positions you said it came in 4 people, just the positions?
In the beginning, in the very initial beginning, it came in, the complaints came into the chief of staff, the recorder, myself, and I believe the one other admin in the building.
Was it HR?
I don't believe it was, no, it wasn't HR. I believe it was the mayor's secretary at that point, because she was very involved in actually setting it up. So I think it was 4 of us. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and to make sure I'm clear, it was not the ethics committee that decided on this anonymity policy. That was the council. Okay, the council was the one back then that changed the ordinance. that made it a requirement that there had to be an address. And then, once it came to the ethics committee, they dealt with, they were dealing with the same thing that you're dealing with. Is there a way for very touchy issues, that somebody might not come forward and report? Was there a way for them to handle it without it, becoming public? And that's where in your policy, if you'll look, in that second Roman numeral 2, in the complaint investigation, you can see in A, the ethics committee shall review the complaint and at their discretion determine when or if the complainant and the subject of the complaint need to be interviewed. Okay. They shall determine when the complainant and the subject of the complaint are to be notified of the investigation. They may request an interview. They felt like that was the most that they could do under what the council had determined that, it had to be anonymous. So before they could launch into something big, they could, at their discretion, say there's nothing here in the face of the complaint to deal with.
Okay, I wanna make sure, one, we want to get the ethics committee back on, so we can
work on
do that.
Mhm.
Two, we want to determine some way to keep the person anonymous. Is that correct? Is that our intent, council?
Originally, this body had talked about just employees. That's still up for you to decide, obviously, or decide on what to recommend. But originally, you had talked about allowing for employees to do solely anonymous and
And then-
keeping it kind of a two-track.
Right.
But obviously, what you recommend is still yet to be.
And then lastly, the reason why it changed is at first, I think it had merit to it. Then it got to where it was every week. Well, John owns the property. I mean, it was that. So that's why we kind of threw it out. But to your point, we now know that, hey, we must be missing something. So I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're trying to accomplish. Ethics committee, it's something that can keep them anonymous. Correct? Okay.
And looking at this, you'd almost have to change the ordinance because the ethics committee has to rely upon, the dictates of the ordinance.
That's right.
And so, that has to be modified. And the policies of the ethics committee could be updated to reflect the current ordinance.
Unless you can figure out a way, that it's not an anonymous complaint. But yet, when it gets to the way the ethics committee deals with it, that there's some level of anonymity with theirs. Now, then you come to the Open Records Act, which requires everything to be done in the open. So I don't know that there is a way that, unless you guys can think of one.
Well, the only thing is that I can think of, Teresa, is if you're giving guidance to the committee as attorney-client privilege.
And, Ron raised a good point, because what we had talked about is the dual track, because we want employees to feel free that if they have a valid complaint, to lodge that complaint without fear of, any kind of reprisal. They don't have that, right now. And we know that every complaint that employees may lodge, they may or may not be ethical complaints. All of them won't be. But if there is a, breach of ethics, and I know when I work for the state, we get calls, I see a state car, parked at the grocery store, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, you're also going to have those, it could be, sexual harassment or intimidation, or age discrimination. It could be any number of things that employees would need to have the ability to report, without fear of losing their job. They may be reporting their supervisor. And as a part of this process, we had planned to work with HR, but they weren't able to be at this meeting. So we will have that conversation with them so that we're covering all of our bases. To just make sure that, if and when we revise the ordinance or recommend revising the ordinance, it's something that will work, for the different areas.
So, to be clear, sexual harassment, age discrimination, all of those types of employee complaints are not handled through ethics, okay? Those are handled through some other means, okay? And those can be and are anonymous, right? The only ethics complaints that we're talking about would be if somebody is misusing their position for their own gain type of situation.
And as a public employee, employees are obligated, as a member of the public, you're under no obligation to report fraud, waste, or abuse. Members of the public are not. But as a public employee, you are obligated to report fraud, waste, and abuse to the comptroller's office. That's never been happened. I don't think it's happened much, but you can be charged for not doing that. And there is an anonymous portal for that, and there is a carve out in the Public Records Act to protect those reports, where there may not be for this. Just, it may be something that if you want to move forward in that, you may want to, but nobody wants the comptroller's office calling them, but if, just to say,
Reference that.
that may be, I mean, when you begin publicizing whatever the new policy is, you may make a note of it. I mean, that you can do this and nobody in Jackson will know who you are.
So you said there is a way for employees to anonymously
They report it to the state.
to report, okay, to the state. That's what, there's nothing though to the city.
Fraud.
It goes straight to the.
Well, fraud, waste, and
state.
abuse covers misuse of an office or misuse of a resource.
My
And I'm
understanding is there
looking
is
at
a way
their
to
form
report
now.
everything except a person using their position for their own personal gain. There is a way to report all of the rest of it anonymously.
And I'm looking at their form now, the comptroller's form to report fraud, waste, and abuse anonymously. And it does not require you to identify yourself.
Right. Although if you want a good response, you should identify yourself and they will still keep you anonymous, by the way. I know this person.
It asks who you're accusing.
Right.
It goes into detail the issue, but it does not ask your name.
But that's the state.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is if that's the route you want to go, it might be a good, footprint.
So from what I hear, we aren't gonna do anything today. We're gonna wait till we get the ethics committee back online and all that kind of stuff. Is that right? What I'm hearing? Cause the reason I said that, I gotta go to another meeting. And I wanted to hear what Nathan had to say on this audit thing. And I was gonna ask us to move on. That's what we're saying.
I hope we're
Well, can we
moving.
move on and come back after? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can pause this discussion.
All right,
Take care.
would you please?
And then we'll come back to this.
Only for you.
Thank you. That's nice of you. Thank you.
Right. So, Nathan. Can you take them?
So I told you last time, we had about 6 things, about 3 or 4 of them were still sort of hanging out there. That has been narrowed down to 1 or 2. Most of those have to do with reconciling which fund cash is in. Now, City of Jackson actually keeps all of its funds, all of its cash in basically one of two bank accounts, and there's about 6 or 8 that we report in one general ledger account. Right now, part of the problem is figuring out where the cash actually is. And I could go into a lot more detail on that, but because we are still trying to narrow that down and get that information where it belongs. And this is back in reference to the due tos and the due froms. We did request and were granted an extension from the comptroller's office for the submission of the 24 audit. And so, I mean, when I leave here, I don't think I'm going to have time before lunch, but when I leave here, we're meeting this afternoon to try to provide the clarity that our auditors are seeking. They said we could figure this out, but that would actually, an auditor's supposed to be independent. And they said if we went through looking for this, it would compromise their independence in this particular thing. So our staff is going to go back through and try to provide the clarity and the backup that they need to put the cash where it belongs in the different funds.
You have the extension until when?
September 30th, I guess, is the last day. It's 30 days. Yeah.
What
I think
happens
the
if we,
budget hasn't officially.
Budget's been submitted. Budget hadn't been approved. So,
budget been submitted to the state?
yes, sir.
When was that?
Thursday.
That's fine.
It is. And, we were going back and forth with them quite a bit, and I've gotten a couple of emails this morning. The biggest one of the biggest things was some of the contributions that we've made to the Jackson Madison County Education Foundation. I think I may have I talked to you about that a little bit. And
Now, as a disclaimer, I serve on that foundation.
that's perfectly fine. We're sending you all the money you know.
We'll take it. Thank you.
Right. But one of the things that created a great deal of confusion is that in the process of converting from the old system to the new system, we issued two checks, 4 or 5 days apart to the Education Foundation for our contribution to the Education Foundation. One of those checks was recorded in the new general ledger and then was voided. The other check was never recorded in the new general ledger, and that's the one that they actually cashed. And so you had $1 million swing, if you think about it right there. And that created a whole bunch of confusion because it was flipping around. And then that combined with, and this is going to be we're in the weeds now, but we went from basically fund-based cash accounting to pool-based cash accounting. Did I say this at the last meeting? I don't remember. And previously, the city had used due-tos and due-froms to sort of emulate in a very bad way pool-based cash accounting, okay? And those due-tos and due-froms have never been cleared. And so since we're using pool cash now, since we've started, we know where the cash that we've got is. Now, keep in mind, it's all in the bank, Larry, okay? It's all in
Somebody else's money.
It's all in the bank. It's just we're not sure what fund it's in. And so that's one of the biggest problems right now is trying to figure out where it actually belongs. And that's not something that the auditors can do for us and maintain their independence as our auditors. So we're working on that here.
So you think you have a resolve by the 30th?
If I don't, I may go over here and start serving flatbreads at the ice house.
So that means, you think you'll have it?
Yeah, I'm planning on having it done.
All right.
Yeah, this is the only thing that is important to me now, except answering Larry's question.
I've got a list. I'll hold on for 2 days.
Yeah.
So there were two checks, 4 days apart. Fine.
I don't know. I
With
do not.
you.
No, it wasn't. The people that wrote them are no longer here. And
Can I-
Good answer.
they were both $500,000 each.
Okay. I
Now-
feel uncomfortable with that.
No,
but-
well, I mean, one of them was never mailed, never delivered, and I'm not sure why that happened. I do know that the first one was voided, and it may be because we wrote it to the wrong people, or because some of these checks went to Jackson Madison County Special Schools, and some of them went to the West Tennessee.
Sam, is that in our budget or what?
Yes, there's an appropriation for that.
That was when the city took back $6 million a year in tax money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an appropriation for it in the budget, and also we've been handling the pass-through. We've been handling the pass-through for the county as well. So they send us $500,000 and we write a check to go through. Now, the really weird thing about this is that when those checks were written, we were already in the new accounting system. We're already writing checks in the new accounting system. But there was a problem that particular week. And so somebody said, we need to get these checks out. And so they fired up the old accounts payable system. And this is why it's a problem.
I can understand that. Even I can understand.
So, and so, I mean, that's where we are.
Thank you.
I mean, I can talk about this for an hour if you'd like for me to, but it's fundamentally, we're down to making sure the cash is in the right funds at this point.
So are we still firing up the old system?
No.
That's over with now.
Lord, no.
All right.
No, the only thing the old system is doing is very poorly doing business tax right now. And we're in the new property tax system. We're not using the old system for property tax as of 2 weeks ago. So
I'm just curious, what was the date of this check? Was it like July, right after the first?
no, and we did not convert. I don't have that in front of me, but we did not convert our accounts payable system at any we didn't convert it on July 1st. They brought the modules on as the modules were ready. And so it was like in April or something.
So it was close to when y'all started to use the new AP
Right,
system.
we were already using, I mean, they were already using, it was a month or two after the old AP, after we switched to the new AP system, I think. Because there are checks that are written in the new system before these checks were written.
And just as an aside, initially, we were receiving the funds to the school system, and then we retained the foundation to manage that for us, so that's probably why one
Yeah.
thing is written.
The whole thing has been, and there's a whole larger discussion about the education foundation, but we're working on that too, so. So, you need to start spending some of that money.
We keep asking the superintendent for some need, he needs very little.
I'm just curious, how much you got in the fund?
I'll never tell.
Yeah.
They got $1 million from us, so let's go up from
Have
there.
they getting how long? For a while?
Well, it took a minute.
It took a minute to get the sales tax to the point that we actually had to begin making the contributions. And it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that that's happened, so. But, you're gonna have some great opportunities.
But it's maxed out now at 500, pretty well set. isn't it?
Yes, sir, that's it.
We're anticipating everything, so thank you, Nathan, I know you have other things.
Was that helpful?
Very much
Yes.
so.
But, well,
Any other questions for me?
yeah, this is a little off the subject, but it's an audit question too. Could you give us where we are on tax revenues, just off the top through the first 2 months?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hang
Hang on a minute.
Sort of send me a copy
We
of that.
appreciate your candor,
Yeah.
especially in.
Yeah, so, I mean, so we have not begun to collect, tax year 25 taxes yet.
Property.
We lack for tax year 24, we lack about $1.3 million out of $36 million built.
Okay, but sales tax, how's that doing?
Sales tax.
For the last 2 months roughly, and that shut up.
Well, we haven't yet gotten our
That's right.
August stuff
Right.
reconciled yet. So our non-property tax revenue is down compared to the same period last year. Some of the state shared revenue is up slightly, but the biggest portion of this is sales tax, obviously, and sales tax is down. The 12-month average for sales tax, the 12-month rolling average for non-property tax revenue is at its lowest point in July since May of 2024.
And compared to last year, how much is that in a percentage or dollars, either one?
If I'd known, I would have brought that whole.
Well, that's okay. This is not for that. We can follow up.
Yeah.
Nathan, if you don't mind, just follow up with Larry,
Yeah.
and then Larry.
I'll send you the stuff we send up at budget committee. I mean,
Okay.
it is useful and entertaining.
Entertaining, yes.
I may,
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
We know you have to go. While he's walking on, let me just say, what we will do is we will revise, we're gonna do, Nathan, Ron is gonna work on reactivating the ethics committee.
I'll just quickly interject, we'll make sure that the members and terms are up to date. Currently, they only meet as needed, right? So I won't convene them because we have a submission, but I'll make sure that we have a full roster, I'll put it that way.
Thank you. And then maybe the chair of that committee could, we probably wanna meet with that
Sure.
chair of that committee at some point.
You know,
But what I would like for us to do, in light of, the, very valuable information that, Risa has shared with us today, is kind of look back at our notes. I think, in order to really affect the change that we're looking for, the ordinance would need to be, amended. And so we need to start working on language for that, so that we could send that to Teresa, let her look at it in conjunction with the policies and procedures of the ethics committee, because they do address some of the concerns that we have, with their policies and procedures. So I think if we do that, then and then probably for our next meeting, we might want you to come back with us and just review it. By that time, the committee would have been reactivated. That gives us time to think through it, to just make sure we're on the right path. I think it's going to be necessary for us to have both some changes to the ordinance in order to kind of substantiate and verify what the ethics committee is doing. They're referring to that in their policies and procedures, and so we want to, make sure they have the latitude to do what, is necessary in order to resolve any complaints that come in. I'm very pleased to hear that we do have an ethics complaint process in place now, so thank you, Ron, you know, for making sure that happened. And thank you, Tawana, for pulling those off and letting us know, where we were feeling pretty good, that we hadn't had any complaints in the number of
Machine.
So we'll deal with what we have to deal with, but thank you all for that, so we can just start wordsmithing this, you know, just so that we have something that we can send back to Teresa and let her take a look at that. And then we'll just kind of see where we go from there.
One thing you might consider doing is meeting with the council in one of their workshop sessions and discussing this with them.
That's a good idea.
their, to see what they think about the anonymity provision to the ordinance.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, so if we just address the mayor and say we'd like to come to the next work session. October, 1st of October.
We'll do that.
That's a good step.
I think so, absolutely. You know, and for this committee, you know, we know that, you know, we have the ability to make recommendations, to the mayor's office. But we've always been very judicious in how we do that, not just make recommendations just for the sake of making recommendations. But, you know, ones that we think will help enhance, city government and what we're already doing. So, but we'll look at that from this viewpoint, you know, if it's something that will enhance our process and what we're doing, then that's what we want to do.
Maybe you, from hearing what you're saying, maybe you guys would like to make a recommendation to the mayor that all of the non-ethics related complaints can be made, that there is a procedure for those. I don't know if you guys know that there is or not. You might want to request that information.
I think that'd be really good for, when Kelsey is back to be able to present on this, because she's gonna have I think a much better idea as to non-ethical complaints, how are they handled, right? And she would have been here today, but.
Thank you, that's a great suggestion, good plan, so we'll put them in there. So ethics. Complaint process, Ron, do you have anything?
Oh, I think we kind of covered everything that you had asked me to share.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions, any business that needs to come before this board? Hearing none, there a motion to adjourn? Okay, moving properly second, we all adjourn. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
You're good.